Good afternoon, welcome to the UK Column News. It is the 28th and it's just 1 o'clock. Myself, Louise Collins, Brian Gerrish, and today on Skype we have David Scott, who is a close friend of Robert Greene and has been supporting him through this latest trial. So he'll be joining us first off, I think. But weather, Brian?
Weather. Well, the weather is pretty nice at the moment, so we decided to look suitably sunny in the studio. Here we are, glowing. A few reports of cloudiness and a bit of rain in other parts of the country, so much as yesterday, variable across the whole country. Well, we're going to, just before we get into the subject of Robert Greene, we're just going to kick off on the subject of the internet. And Mike, you've picked up on some interesting stuff here.
Yes, we've got a tweet here from the World Economic Forum, because today is the initial scoping meeting of the Net Mundial initiative, and that's been taking place at the World Economic Forum. And they've tweeted out here, our common purpose is to prevent fragmentation and protectionism. And that's a quote from the CEO of Accenture, Pierre Nanterme. Now, he in the past has been a member of the executive board, for example, of the B20, Green Growth Action Alliance. And the B20 is the parallel economic conference to the G20. So it happens at the same time that the G20 goes on as for corporations rather than governments. But he's been particularly interested in the Green Growth Action Alliance. And that was launched by the World Economic Forum to work on the growing need, this is a quote, the growing need for private funding in sustainability. So his common purpose is really an agenda, which is Agenda 21. But getting back to the internet then, it has to be said, they are saying that it has to be said that there's no formal relationship between this World Economic Forum initiative and the original Brazil conference, which took place in April, I think, with the same name, Net Mundial. It's about internet governance. It's about global internet governance and how the internet is going to be governed from here on in. The World Economic Forum says that today's event is an informal initiative, among others, that may emerge, seeking to carry forward collaborative spirit of Sao Paulo and build on the principles articulated there in two specific ways: interdisciplinary dialogue and capacity building in a multi-stakeholder setting for the purpose of supporting the evolution of a more open, participatory, stable and effective distributed governance ecosystem that both enhances trust and reflects the velocity and transnational nature of the internet. So if you can work out what the hell that means, please, answers on a postcard, please.
It's newspeak. They're really talking about a dictatorship. The more transparent and open and democratic it is, the more it's heading towards some sort of dictatorship.
Yeah, okay. So they go on to say there are a range of non-technical policy challenges that increasingly occupy the attention of political, business and civil society leaders, which would benefit from the participation of economic, security, human rights and other institutions and experts in a multi-stakeholder setting in order to strengthen understanding, enhance trust and identify potential areas of common ground. Well, wonderful. Okay, so that was the original, that's the Net Mundial website. That was the original conference in Sao Paulo, I think in April this year. So they're now looking at how the internet is going to be governed going forward. And I use that word. Kate will kill me for using that word, but I use that phrase carefully because this is one of their stock phrases.
Going forward together.
Yeah. In a multidisciplinary, transnational, multi-stakeholder way for the common ground and the common purpose.
Yeah.
And this is the common purpose in action, I believe.
It's absolutely the common purpose, and very interesting that I've been getting a lot of emails over the past few weeks from people saying they're seeing common purpose at work, pointing out that it hasn't disappeared, and we've got some very interesting information about the overall common purpose agenda, which of course is moving us quickly towards the one world government. So what's the significance of controls on the internet? Well, of course, Robert Greene, who is still under house arrest, is not able to use the internet at all because, well, he'd be a naughty boy if he did it. So let's just remember Robert, who's been speaking out, trying to protect children. He's now been in prison twice. Let's just think about that against the background of what we're seeing in the mainstream press today. And we can tell you that according to our figures, it's now his 100th day under house arrest. So he still doesn't know the charges properly. And how has he been put under house arrest to report to the local police every day? That's the whim of the Alex Salmon junta. And we'll remind ourselves of the players. We've got Mr. Salmon, of course, Sir Stephen House, now running what's effectively a private police force over the whole of Scotland, and Justice Minister Kenny MacAskill.
Can I just ask, can prisoners sort of like who are in prison for murder, rape, etc., are they allowed to have access to the internet in their time out, in their social rooms and things?
I believe the answer to that is yes,
Right,
apart from the fact
okay.
there are restrictions.
Right.
Obviously, there are restrictions on what parts of the internet they can get, and special prisoners such as paedophiles are severely restricted in what they can do. But in general, yeah, they can have access.
But Robert's unable to use anything, and if he was caught, I wonder what would happen.
Well, he could be breaching his bail conditions.
And then put back in prison.
And then put back in prison on no charge.
Nice.
But let's hear from the man.
Let's hear from, David Scott. Good afternoon. Welcome to the UK column.
Mike, it was worth noting that even the sheriff at the last a hearing that Robert had described the bail conditions as somewhat draconian. Robert is completely prohibited from being on the internet. He can't effectively leave his hometown because he's got to report to the police every day. And there are enormous restrictions on what he can do. He's still allowed to use the post. That's about it. We can write to him. So he's very much prevented from researching anything, which is obviously affecting the preparation for his trial. And we would hope that the bail restrictions would be eased a little bit in the future, because the trial is not until trial proper doesn't start until next January 2015. So 100 days and many more counting.
It's quite incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. How did you come to meet Robert, David?
Well, he became a neighbour. He didn't want to become a neighbour. He was lifted from his home in Cheshire, and he was locked up in Her Majesty's Prison Perth, which is 5 minutes away from my house. I'd been following the case since about 2009 on the internet, and I'd seen Robert's speeches and talks on YouTube, and had become aware of the case largely because of that. The first time I heard the name Holly Greig, I was sitting in a hotel room in Jerusalem on holiday, feeling a little bit homesick, and surfing a site from a Jewish Israeli nonconformist thinker and jazz saxophonist who's now resident in London because his views aren't particularly welcome in his home country. And there was a reference to Scotland. So I clicked on that, and I discovered it said Holly Greig, Scotland's shame. And I found out a lot of very, very concerning facts about potential murders and cover-ups and inability to properly investigate crimes, and the use of psychiatric resources to coerce people, and it was enormously concerning. And I started to follow the case and listen to Robert Green's talks over the internet. And I wrote a few letters to my local MSP, Rosanna Cunningham, when I got some standard stock, it's sub judice, I can't do anything to help replies. I did get a reply, but it didn't move it forward. Until Robert moved into the neighbourhood. So I started visiting him, and I got to know him really, really rather well. And he's a very genuine chap, and he's quite amazing because he's not cowed. He's been locked up twice. Prison is not an easy place to be. He was in a high security wing in a high security prison. Perth's quite a high level prison. It's not one of those kind of open prisons. He was in with murderers and people who had done some really very nasty things, and you're locked up. You spent most of his day in his cell. It's a very hard environment to be in. And he was really quite remarkable, very indomitable. I think I only ever saw him look even down once. When we came to visit him, there was a lot of laughter. There was a lot of. He was always very upbeat, and he was totally determined to do this for Holly because he believes what Holly says. He believes that an injustice has been done, and he's not going to back down. And it's very rare to see that degree of determination without any prospect of any personal gain. This is all cost for Robert. He just believes it's right.
Yes, it is quite extraordinary how he has been prepared to stay with what he believes. And one of the things that Robert's always said to me is, when you have sat there and heard Holly describe what has happened to her, and of course it's still the case, quite rightly, that only a small part of her evidence has come into the public domain, because that evidence should be properly investigated by the police and brought to a court. But Robert has said that when you hear details of what actually happened to her, he said, there's no way I'm going to back down. So your opinion at the moment, what can you give us an overall assessment of the case as you see it at the moment? I know you mentioned that Robert was put forward for the Nobel Peace Prize. That was quite a significant event from Westminster. But can you give us a sort of overview as to where you think things are? And then I think you've got some comments on sentencing.
Yes. Robert's time in prison, there were some highs and lows. When the day we heard he'd been nominated for the Nobel Prize was definitely one of the highs. I'll just read out the first paragraph of the nomination. It says, I am a British parliamentarian and I am writing to nominate Mr. Robert Greene for the 2015 Nobel Peace Prize. Robert Greene is a British children's rights campaigner who has been actively involved for several years in challenging the failure of the police in Scotland to properly investigate the extensive child sex abuse allegations of Holly Greig, a young woman with Down syndrome who was allegedly sexually abused as a child by a large and organised paedophile ring. And that quite briefly summarises the case. The case is Holly made allegations. Holly's allegations were backed up by 5 separate specialist reports, which confirmed that abuse had taken place. Some of the reports named some of the people who were the likely abusers. And there was no proper investigation. Holly has named in total 23 people. 22 of the names have been passed to the police. And at least 21 of those people have never been questioned or interviewed or chatted to by the police about those allegations. No computers have been seized. No investigation really seems to have been carried out. Even though police intelligence reports identify that the 2 people she accused that are in her own family were known to Aberdeen police to have predilection for very young girls. So the Aberdeen Police Intelligence Report seems to recognise that there's a concern here, but there doesn't seem to have been a proper and thorough investigation, despite all of the claims to the contrary. As I got to know Robert, I started to read a lot more in a lot more detail about the case. One thing that I found, which is really quite remarkable, is the sentencing comments that ended his trial at Stonehaven. Robert's trial was for breach of the peace. He was arrested when he was trying to stand for Parliament in Aberdeen South on a Scotland Against Crooked Lawyers and Justice for Holly Greig ticket. So he was prevented from campaigning in the constituency. He was locked up. He was held on bail. The bail conditions prevented him from being there. Very unusual. I mean, absolutely unique in British history that someone who's standing for Parliament couldn't visit the constituency that he's trying to get elected in. £500,000 at least later of government money the case came to trial in Stonehaven, which is a little town just down the coast from Aberdeen. The case was kind of downgraded so that the maximum sentence would be a year. The case was heard in front of a single sheriff, and there was no jury. So Robert was convicted of breach of the peace on the decision of the sheriff. And here is what was said, or some of what was said at the sentencing. So this is from Sheriff Principal Bowen. It is sad to see someone of your age finding yourself in this position, which I guess does acknowledge to some extent the fact that Robert at that point was about 65 and had never had any sort of criminal record. He's a law-abiding citizen. It goes on, nevertheless, it is completely unacceptable in a society governed by the rule of law for an individual to take matters into their own hands. I think that's a very interesting statement because it's actually quite right. If we are in a society governed by the rule of law, there would be no need for anybody to take matters into their own hands because there would be a justice system to appeal to. And it doesn't actually state that we do live. It just says, hypothetically speaking, in a society which is governed by the rule of law, you wouldn't need to do this. It then goes on, strangely, it is totally unacceptable to name people as being involved with paedophilia and murder. Making allegations of paedophilia and murder in this day and age is a very serious matter indeed. In any day and age, I would have thought. It is completely despicable. You carried on this campaign regardless of what others told you, having done little research into the basic facts. Now, as anyone who's spoken to Robert knows, he's got an excellent memory and he's absolutely encyclopedic on the basic facts. So how anybody could say that is a mystery. Only someone stupid or obsessed with their own importance would do what you have done. I suspect of you it is the latter. That is an odd statement. I don't know if you find that strange in sentencing statements, but that seems quite bizarre. And it took me a while to realise what it's actually saying. What it's actually saying is there is no motive. No one has proved in court a motive for Robert to do what he did, to take a stand on this matter, other than concern for Holly Greig and concern for justice. And I don't think you could actually convict someone of breach of the peace in Scotland if their motive was concern for a potential victim and trying to uphold justice, because that isn't breach of the peace. If you're making a stand on that ground, it's not breach of the peace. So I think what that statement, which is on the surface just quite insulting, is actually saying is that the Crown had not shown a motive. And that in order to sentence Robert, there has to be a motive. So this was the judge filling in the blanks. It goes on. By your campaign, you have sought to undermine the criminal justice system and the government of Scotland as a whole. But your conduct goes even further. It has had a significant effect on those you have alleged have been involved in this. I have listened to evidence of 9 of those who were harassed in their families and heard about the impact it has had on them. Only the most twisted of minds would not accept their evidence. You have said that you do not accept their evidence. The evidence of each of them in their own way was very compelling testimony. Now, a couple of things here. You see the judge is saying that Robert is a threat to the government of Scotland as a whole, which is an odd statement, given the fact he's campaigning about one specific case of assault on one girl. So how is that a threat to government as a whole? And also, we're in a situation where the government has a lot of power. Government has a monopoly of the use of force. It has almost unlimited tax-raising power, so unlimited money. We need the judiciary to protect us from the government. We really don't need the judiciary standing up and saying that they are protecting the government from one man. A very odd comment. It goes on, only the good sense of the people of Aberdeen and the responsible behaviour of the majority of the media prevented this situation from deteriorating. The law is on the side of the innocent, and I must protect the innocent from you. I should also say that you've consistently criticised the prosecuting authorities without any justification. If the Crown are criticised for anything in this matter, it's not bringing this case on indictment where you could have been subject to further penalties. Now, indictment in Scotland means that you can go to a sheriff with jury trial, which is 5 years maximum sentence. Where if it's before a sheriff only, it's only a year's maximum sentence. The Crown authorities have been absolutely consistent in threatening Robert with a solemn hearing in front of a jury with 5 years potential sentence, and they have been equally consistent in never actually doing this because they don't want to put Robert Green in front of a jury because I think the jury would believe him.
Yeah.
There then is a missing bit. There's a piece that's missed out of this. Robert reported it later on. What the judge said, and it's not in the court transcript, what the judge said is, how dare you, an Englishman, come to Scotland and tell us what to do? We know how to run the justice system in Scotland. Now, that was said, and I've had 5 separate people who were in court that day confirm to me that those words, or words very similar to them, were spoken by the judge, by the sheriff. And it was taken out of the court record. It's not in the court record, it doesn't exist. This is very interesting. A couple of things. One, I quite like the fact that Robert, despite his accent sounding English, is in fact Welsh, which shows you that you don't need to be well informed in order to be bigoted. It shows prejudice on the part of the judge. It's a very strange thing to say. Again, another very, very strange thing to say. What has Robert's Englishness or Welshness or nationality got to do at all with the case? How is justice not blind to that? And it took me a while to suss out why it had been taken out of the record. I came on, there's a book written about the Scottish judiciary. It's quite an interesting book, quite sympathetic, it praises them quite a lot, but it does describe a few things about international law, and it describes a case in Russia under Stalin, where a series of British and Commonwealth engineers working for the Metropolitan Vickers Company were on trial. They'd been building a power station. Stalin's Russia was needing to industrialize and didn't have the abilities inside their own country. They'd been charged with wrecking, sabotage, which was nonsense, and were put on a show trial in Moscow. One chap in particular, Mr. Thornton, was not cowed by the intimidatory tactics of the Soviet regime and got right up the judge's nose. And when the judge sentenced him, he said, "Your only use would be to manure the soil of our Soviet fields." That was recorded by more than one individual there in memoirs and is also completely missing from the court records. It concerns me greatly as a Scot that I'm starting to see parallels between Soviet Russia under Stalin and the practice of our ancient justice system, which should be protecting the individual, not the state. Anyway, the question is, why did they take it out? Why did they go to the trouble of editing it? And I think that it's because the Scottish courts actually have a very high standard of protecting the individual and being non-biased. There was a case back in the 80s where a judge, when he was relaxing at a curling club during the miners' strike, said that if any of these miners come before him on breach of the peace charges, they'll not be getting legal aid. Now, later, one of the striking miners came before him on an unrelated matter and didn't get legal aid and was convicted, and he appealed on the basis of bias. This is what the appeal court found in his favour, and this is what Lord Ross of the appeal court said. He said, "There is nothing to suggest that at the trial the sheriff acted unfairly. What the sheriff failed to note was that the interests of justice required not merely that he should not display bias, but the circumstances should not be such as to create in the mind of a reasonable man the suspicion of the sheriff's partiality. Now, that's grounds for appeal in Scotland. So I think the reason that the comment about how dare you, an Englishman, come here and tell us what to do, was taken out because it shows bias. It shows in the mind of a reasonable man a partiality in the case of the judge. That's bias. That's grounds for appeal in Scotland. So I think the fact that the court record is not accurate is highly suspicious and warrants further investigation. I have raised this with people in Scotland and nobody's listening. I'll just finish the sentencing comments. It's clear that you want to continue your campaign. In the face of all of the evidence, I have no option other than to sentence you to a period of imprisonment. For charge 1, you'll be sentenced to 9 months imprisonment. I think that's a breach of the peace. And for charge 3, sentenced to 3 months to run consecutively. So you've got a year. So here's a judge that's saying you're English, you have no right to be saying this because you're English, which shows partiality. He doesn't seem to have any clear idea as to what Robert's motivation was. The motive's not been proven. And he is saying that Robert has a most twisted of minds, despite the fact that that was not in evidence, and he's not qualified to judge Robert's state of mind. So a lot of things in that point to abusive process, and that requires investigation in Scotland.
David, sorry, just to come in. I'm just watching the time a little bit because we've still got some news to do. You're giving us an excellent, very concise breakdown of what's happening. If we can say to you to take another just 2 or 3 minutes, if you will, we would love to have you back because I know Louisa, myself, and Mike is indicating so in the background. We've got a number of questions we'd like to put to you, but I think we'll be a bit tight for time. So can we offer you a couple of minutes, really, to take us to a point where if you're happy to come back with us, we can go deeper into it and ask some questions.
Okay. Well, very briefly, from reading about the case, I started to ask questions. So the first time I started to ask questions, I turned up. Mr. McCaskill came to Perth to tell us all to vote for independent Scotland. So I turned up at that and tried to ask him a question about the rule of law and the Holly Gregg case. When I mentioned Holly Gregg, the reaction was quite distinct, and he had a bit of a rant, I think it's fair to say, and mentioned Robert Greene, mentioned Dame Elise Angelini a lot, actually, and seemed to be quite unsettled by it. And when I've got more time, I'll go into exactly what he said. But his comments against Robert Greene were quite extreme. I recorded them and asked for an explanation, and I didn't get one. Several months later, this reached the ears of Robert's Member of Parliament, and that's David Mowat MP. So he has written to Mr. McCaskill asking for, quote, I believe it would be helpful if you were to offer Mr. Greene a written apology for what was said and for any inference that may have been taken to suggest that you consider the man held in prison awaiting trial could be considered guilty of the offences that he'd been charged with in advance of being tried. I thought that was quite well put. Once the letter from Robert's MP reached the Scottish office, the Scottish government, we started to get a little bit of information coming back the other way. Very interestingly, Robert got a letter which said, amongst other things, that the allegations regarding Holly Gregg were fully investigated by Grampian Police and reviewed by the then Lord Advocate Dame Elise Angelini. That's interesting because that's the exact reverse of what the Fiscal had previously written to Thally. The Fiscal had stated that the Lord Advocate has not had any involvement in the recent decision by the Crown Council that there should be no criminal proceedings. So we're seeing that the information that's going from the Crown Office to Holly Gregg and her family is, in fact, the reverse of the truth. And that's been now confirmed. Both sides of that, both the truth of it and what's been stated, have been confirmed by multiple pieces of correspondence. So we have some questions to ask and answer there. One of the other things, I should briefly state this before I go. As I was researching this, I found there's a very good online paper called the Scottish Law Reporter. They reported on October 25, 2012, that there is a secret, unaudited slush fund of public money used to pay for legal advice and private legal representation for members of staff within the Crown Office that become charged with criminal offences or become involved in civil disputes. The fund, which legal insiders claim is buried deep in the budget of the Crown Office, is rumoured to have paid out millions of pounds over its existence in cases involving its own staff. We now have had written confirmation that Dame Elise Angelini's civil case against Robert Green is funded by the Crown Office, essentially by the British taxpayer. And I think that's a matter of concern, and we need to find out more about that too.
Agreed, definitely.
Well, David, thank you very much for that. Just for the benefit of a couple of people who've asked on the in the chat box, are you a solicitor? I'm going to say no. David is a member of the public. I believe you're an engineer,
yes.
but who has been working very hard to help Robert. So really, this shows us what we can do as the public when we have people who are prepared to put the hours in and the detail and stand up and be counted. So, David, I hope you will come on with us again. I'll speak to you off air to see if we can book a slot. But thank you very much for giving us that in-depth summary of what's been happening around Robert. And it's giving us a look into the fact that there's some very murky business going on in the Scottish courts. Okay, thank you very much.
Happy to come back. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, bye-bye. Well, if we just move on a bit, of course, the courts and our politicians all intermixed. We'll just run through a few things pretty quickly here. Yeah. But who's at work behind the scenes? Maybe Alex Salmond or David Cameron or even Tony Blair.
Exactly. So here Press TV are making a comparison of Cameron's outlook on war with ISIS and Blair's war on terror after 9/11. They're showing in this article the panicked response to the Lee Rigby murder. We're going to do more on that with Chris Bivvy when he comes on. The fact that Boris Johnson's want to turn law on its head and presume all Britons travelling to and from Iraq and Syria to be guilty of terrorism until they are proven innocent. And they are also looking at how habeas corpus has also been turned on its head. Worth a read, that article. We could go into it more, but
so it follows in very nicely. Trouble in the courts in Scotland. Yep. South of the border, we've got David Cameron making up things on the hoof. And if we're mentioning Cameron, we're dealing the Lib Lab con, then we better get in your favourite, Mr. Blair, I think.
Okay. 14 unarmed civilians were shot down in Kazakhstan, protesting its ruler, Nursultan Nazarbayev, back in 2011. It has been leaked that Tony Blair has actually written to Nazarbayev back in July of 2012, ahead of when he was due to speak at Cambridge University. Tony Blair wrote to him and added to his speech that he was going to be given at Cameron. And here is what Mr. Blair wrote to the President of Kazakhstan. Dear Mr. President, here is a suggestion for a paragraph to include in the Cambridge speak. I think it is best to meet head-on the Zanazoin issue. The fact is you have made changes following it, but in any event, these events, tragic though they were, should not obscure the enormous progress that Kazakhstan has made dealing with it, the massacre, in the way I suggest is the best way for the Western media. It will also serve as a quote that can be used in the future setting out the basic case for Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
And then he signs it in his own writing with very best wishes. I look forward to speaking with you soon. All the best, Tony Blair.
Well, credit where it's due, Lou. I mean, what better man could you get helping you cover something up than Tony Blair?
Well,
he's a master at it.
He is.
The fact he can now make millions out of doing what he did best while he was in government.
Yeah, he's actually made millions from being an advisor to the Kazakhstani government. Absolutely millions each year.
So Cameron is working on making people guilty, even if they're not. Blair is helping dictators and helping to cover up massacres. So
exactly.
These people also running NATO, Mike, I think.
Well, NATO, in fact, as we know, the conference happening next week. So this is an article from The Guardian here. NATO plans East European bases under to counter Russia. The subheading is NATO chief announces move in response to Ukraine crisis and says alliance is dealing with a new Russian military approach. They say that NATO continues its aggression against Russia in the lead up to the NATO conference in Newport next week. They're saying that NATO plans to deploy forces, i.e. boots on the ground, to Eastern Europe for the first time. We know that 1,300 British troops will be part of that, for what that's worth. Because 1,300 isn't a huge number, but I mean, if you take all the other countries involved, then it's the numbers become a little more significant. Perhaps not significant relative to what Russia has available to them, but anyway, that's another conversation. But Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who's the head of NATO, said that NATO will modernise its armed forces and help Ukraine, counter the threat from Russia, and it's all threat from Russia, threat from Russia, threat from Russia. He said, we will adopt what we call a readiness action plan with the aim to be able to act swiftly in this completely new security environment in Europe. We have something already called the NATO Response Force, whose purpose is to be able to be deployed rapidly if needed. Now it's our intention to develop what I would call a spearhead within that response force at a very, very high readiness. What for? What's the high readiness for? But anyway. So perhaps unsurprisingly, Russia Today, commenting on the same subject, their headline is a bit more in your face. They're saying, red alert, NATO mission creep advancing to Russian border. Well, actually, I don't think that's an unfair headline, but I don't think that mission creep is the right phrase.
No,
but
it is the mission.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we've got a little animation here just showing NATO's so-called mission creep, and it's not really mission creep, as I say, because it started in 1949, and we can see the countries being added as we go through. It's a bit slow, so apologies about that. We see the countries being added as we move on through the years. Spain in 1982, and then suddenly in 1990 we've got East Germany, because Germany was reunified, of course, and then we start to get into the Eastern European states in 1999, and in 2004 we're moving even further east, and now we're potentially having Ukraine join NATO as well. So it's just for to suggest that this is Russian aggression. It's just it's nonsense. It's hypocrisy. It's NATO aggression is what it looks like to me. And when you take into account some of the legislation that's coming in this year in the United States, we're going to cover that when we've got Mark Anderson on the programme in the next day or two. This is a bit of arrogance from NATO to suggest that they've got to have a rapid reaction force to deal with Russian aggression.
Yeah, it's very, very much in your face. Leading nicely, of course, to what's happening in South Wales. Just wanted to come back onto the gulag that's being created around the NATO summit. Wales Online here saying the man in charge of policing says the huge Cardiff protest fence isn't a Berlin Wall, following criticism. Well, Mike showed some pictures of that yesterday, and we would say it is absolutely a Berlin Wall. BBC picking up a bit on it, but in general there is not what we think should be the proper outcry. We've got 9,500 police, including 1,500 from Wales, and we've got around 10,000 support staff and some 2,000 journalists attending. We've got 150 visiting heads of state. These are people so important that we can actually turn a city, Cardiff, into a gulag. And somebody emailed us, Cornelia in fact, with some very interesting comments, which I thought we'd bring on screen. This was the email. Dear Brian, the unnecessarily extreme fencing and checkpoints in Newport and Cardiff serve the following main purposes: to reinforce to the public the government's claims that we're in danger of a terrorist attack. So this is the fear-mongering. A test run of these measures, A, for the police, and B, for the public's reaction. And it should be para 3, to set a precedent and acclimatise the public to such restrictions, which are intended to become more and more frequent. We have already accepted restrictions, X-ray machines, pat-downs and searches at airports. Slowly, catchy monkey. So I think this lady has got it absolutely there. This is a test on the public. Can you take a city which is functioning as a normal open city and turn it into some form of Soviet prison camp overnight. What do people do? Nothing.
Nothing. You know what's amazing is if you look back to when Kennedy was out and about, there would be no corners, there'd be no barriers, nothing. People would be out there cheering. And what does it say of today's leaders that these fences have to go up, rings and protests and everything else? I mean, what does it say and what's happened?
Somebody
over
is
these
going to
few
say,
years?
well, of course, he was shot, and therefore.
But they had crowds of people cheering.
Yes.
Are we going to see crowds of people cheering and clapping the leaders as they approach Wales? I don't think so.
Well, we're not going to be there clapping and cheering, that's for sure. And then, as it happens, we had John Hurst with us yesterday. Unfortunately, had to leave. But a comment came in about, this was another email sent in talking about the fact that Her Majesty's armed forces receive training in the laws of war. But what's going on with our police? Are they getting the necessary training? So we put this question directly to John Hurst, and this is his reply. He says that police training has been reduced from a 20-week residential course to 10 weeks, which is non-residential, and it's mainly distance learning. So it's learning not from the experience of other police officers, but actually from computer-based courses. And he says, combine that with the lowered recruiting standards, and it's doubtful whether the police are trained in any of these very serious matters of the application of law and common law and what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
So there we are, a gulag in South Wales, 10,500 police, many of whom we now know are trained to use automatic weapons, tasers, gas and batons, but they're a bit lacking in the application of common law. What's the result? Well, this sort of thing. So we've been reporting on child abuse victim Melanie Shaw. Yesterday there was an appeal for a hearing for bail, a bail application, and we made some comment on this because it was originally listed as an open court hearing, but the judge, Gregory David Dickinson, specifically barred the public and a Mackenzie friend who turned up from the hearing. And we were interested to find out that the court narrative stated the hearing was adjourned until 10:45, but public who were present state that this is simply untrue because once the doors of that court had been closed to the public, the hearing was actually finished at 10:25. And we just want to make sure that people pick up on this. There was some uncertainty yesterday as the result of the case. We can tell you the result was that Melanie's bail application has been withdrawn. And we're just going to put alongside this that members of the public also report that unusually no details of Melanie's 25th of July court hearing in Nottingham have been listed either. So not sure what's going on here, but something rather strange. Perhaps it's a bit on a par with Robert Green. And this is the key piece of information, that the bail application has been withdrawn and we don't know what's going to happen next.
Melanie's, Azra's asking in the chat room, did she have proper representation?
Yesterday she did, because there was a barrister present in court for her, but we still believe on the 25th of July, Melanie believes she had a solicitor in court, but in fact that person was not a solicitor, they were a clerk. And we're still looking at that a little bit further, but I can say that yesterday she did have a barrister representing her. We also understand that the Crown prosecution barrister seemed to have very little to say. So we wonder whether there's a little bit of thinking going on in the Crown Prosecution Service at the moment. But of course, across the country, we're just seeing more and more exposure of the abuse of children. We'd like to thank John for sending us in this. It was a lady called Sheila Taylor from the National Working Group for Sexually Exploited Children who appeared on the BBC. And John was interested in the language this lady was using. She was talking about victims, essentially. We want a better word. They've been serially raped over a number of years. What have we done to help them repair, to recover from that? And they're intact and they're now in society. And if we're not careful, we're going to have a cohort of people who do not know what a healthy sexual relationship is. So there's some interesting things here, but what John picked up on was the fact that serious abuse of these people had sort of become lost in the newspeak.
Yeah, and the norm.
And the word cohort had been used, which of course refers to a unit of the Roman army. So he wasn't sure what this lady was talking about. Well, we decided just to delve into the National Working Group a little bit. So this is a shot from their website. It says they've got a team of specialists with a range of skills, and they're there to offer support and experience to victims who come into a very big network. But we were interested in this statement: we will proactively engage with the local safeguarding boards and their partner agencies, researchers and policy writers in all areas: training, prevention, prosecution, therapeutic care. So what they're saying is that they have been working with the very agencies that appear to have been failing the youngsters in the first place. And we'd encourage you to go and have a look at this website. Here's Sheila Taylor at the top, MBE, of course. So she's giving her background. But if we go down, we can see that we've got Bina there, who's also been working in child protection. She's worked in Leicestershire and Rutland, safeguarding children's boards, developing and delivering the multi-agency response for protection. And the gentleman at the bottom, Mike Hand, well, of course, he has been working with the police and soccer, and he's boasting that he got a special award for helping reduce the trafficking of Lithuanian women into the country. So it all sounds very nice. If we look at the trustees, it gets pretty interesting. We've got Peter Stone, independent business consultant with a range of experience of working in both the voluntary and corporate sectors, Aegis Trust, NGOs, and lady at the bottom I was particularly interested in because she's helped the Crown Prosecution Service to form policy, presumably the same policy that meant that the Crown Prosecution Service has got Melanie Shaw, a victim of abuse, banged up in prison on no charge. So on it goes, and of course you picked up on the 1,400 girls and rapists abused.
Yeah, so here we have it, passing the buck by the very people who were tasked to ensure the safety of the children in Rotherham, with more stories coming out by the hour, highlighting the severity of the abuse that is actually still, seems to be still going on today in and around Rotherham. Its leaders are refusing to stand accountable. I again contacted Ofsted. But first of all, we're going to have a look at the people who are saying there's no blame. They're not going to be standing a blame. So here we have Sean Wright, former head of Children's Services and is now the police commissioner, will not step down, will not take responsibility. We have Joyce Thacker, who is Rotherham's Social Services Director, again, taking no responsibility. Jed Fitzgerald, head of Rotherham Council up until 2003, taking no responsibility. Paul Larkin, who is the current deputy leader since Mr. Stone, who stood down yesterday. So this guy, Paul Larkin, has now taken over. And here we have Marie McGuinness. Now, Marie McGuinness was Her Majesty's Inspector of Ofsted and did the report on children's services back in 2010. Now, yesterday I did say to you that I had contacted Ofsted, asked did they have a statement. And this is the statement, the email that I've received from them. Since Ofsted took over children's social care inspections in 2008, we have given a range of judgments to Rotherham Council. In 2009, inspectors judged the council to be inadequate, highlighting a number of issues that related to the protection of children and their safety. Bearing in mind, I was actually looking at the 2010 report, but she felt the need to quote 2009. We have since introduced a new, tougher inspection framework, placing greater significance on the experiences of children and young people and the effectiveness of the help they receive. Inspectors are now required to evaluate the extent to which the risks of sexual exploitation are understood and acted upon. Good is now the only acceptable minimal standard. Any service not yet judged as good is awarded the grade of requires improvement. Ofsted is now consulting a new multi-agency inspections that will further strengthen the inspection of children's social services. Well, I contacted, I phoned them back again, tried to get in touch with Emma and asked her, did Marie McGuinness, who I can't find a picture, HMI inspector for Ofsted, has she made any statement or has she stood down from her position as she gave Rotherham Social Services and Child Protection the all clear back in 2010? And Emma didn't know, and again I'm waiting to hear back to see what Marie McGuinness, Her Majesty's Inspectors, has to say.
So we've got Ofsted saying, well, children have been raped, abused,
Yep.
seriously damaged, but we've put new procedures in place, and we're going to work even closer with the agencies
Exactly.
who have failed over very many years. So
Yep.
this is just people going around investigating themselves. And of course, nobody is put in prison. There's no malfeasance in public office. It's all learning from our mistakes.
Every person on that little picture board there should be made accountable for and investigated and sacked. But the person who I think should have been responsible for this is also this lady here, who's looking like a little beaut. And her comments on this is it's not her job as Home Secretary to hire and fire police and crime commissioners. And I actually asked Mike earlier, whose responsibility was it if it isn't hers? And you said it was just...
The key point
Well,
is
it's
you've
an
got people
elected,
who are
an elected position.
She should
so-
really come out and make a statement. Don't you agree?
Well, you need to look. We need to look at the rules for the election of police and crime commissioners and see whether they can be recalled. For example, don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Well, we're going to stick with Ms. May because at the end of the day, she's got the responsibility. So this was quite interesting. Here, according to the Telegraph, Theresa May is condemning Rotherham officials who failed to act as 1,400 children were abused. So she's got an opinion on this. But of course, isn't she to blame? Shouldn't she quit?
Absolutely.
Because she's running effectively she's running the Home Office. She's got ultimate responsibility for what's going on in investigations. So she points the finger at somebody else, says, you better go. But isn't it time this lady stood down? And really, what's going on at the moment? Somebody called the Home Office again from UK Column, and we asked them, has she appointed a chairman for the child abuse inquiry? And we got the same very vague, almost mumbled reply that, she will do soon. And we don't know whether soon is tomorrow, next week, next month, next year.
So what's she actually doing? She's certainly not doing her job.
She's probably on holiday.
Yeah, probably.
Probably still on holiday because she's looking a bit tired and stressed. And then for hypocrisy on the subject of child abuse, we had to bring in Nick Clegg. He said that Sean Wright should do the decent thing and resign. Accuses the police of neglect of vulnerable children in Rotherham and says the Crime Commissioner should stand down. This is what he said. He feels sickened. He feels as sickened as anybody else at the suffering of so many children and the blatant neglect of the people who are there to protect them, people in the council, social services, children's services, the police who just turned a blind eye, just turned their backs on some of the most vulnerable people in society. These people in the first place should feel a sense of responsibility. On he goes, bangs on, bangs on. But this is it, isn't it? Really, what has Nick Clegg and the Lib Dems, with the exception of John Hemming, what have they actually done to bring these abusers to book?
I don't think he'll do much because he's a very close friend of Mr. Britton as well, isn't he? So well, probably why he's keeping a little bit quiet and...
Well, this is possible, but we know that there is a whole linkage between people at the Westminster end. They don't appear to want a full investigation into Elm Guesthouse and what's been going on. And really, we need to ask why. We just brought this up as an example, but of course, it is now spreading in UK and worldwide. Westminster paedophile ring claims, 20 top figures involved. So we've got another report here from a former child protection manager who said, look, this problem isn't about dirty old men in raincoats. We're talking about people at the top of the structure. And if it's in Parliament, if we've got, for example, people who know what's happening and they're in the Privy Council, that includes links to people in the Magic Circle north of the border in Scotland, it's a cover-up.
But I mean, look what we're looking at. I mean, this is an article going back to July the 8th. Okay, where is this happening? Where is it in the press today? What is happening? Leon Britton, is he still walking around? Has he been brought in for question?
We don't know about Mr. Britton. There are a number of people who are being mentioned at the moment.
But it's not in the press. It's completely wiped from the press. The whole paedophile thing within the heart of government. It is completely gone from the press.
And that is because people at the top of the tree are extremely worried. And Theresa May is going to fix child abuse. She hasn't done too well on Migration. So here's the Guardian. Net migration to the UK soars by 39%. So we can't run schools, we can't run the hospitals, we can't fill the potholes in the road. This is not to do with people or the colour of people. This is to do with common sense. An extra 243,000, they think. Notice the language by the Guardian. We no longer talk about immigration. We talk about net migration. That's a lot softer. But here's the lady responsible with a little slinky off-the-shoulder number. It doesn't matter whether it's immigration or children. What is this woman doing? Let's ask for Theresa May to be sacked, and let's ask for somebody to come in as Home Secretary who's actually going to deal with what's really going on. And if we've got problems with the number of people in the country, one of the areas it's affecting visibly is the housing market.
Well, all I was going to say about this is the total fraud of these types of headlines. So this is an effort to reboost the housing market. We see these headlines appearing in the mainstream media from time to time, just an attempt to reboost the housing market and get people interested in taking risk again. Of course, since we're not seeing mortgages being taken out for new house purchases, we're seeing mortgages being taken out to try and maintain a fixed interest rate. This is an attempt to build things up again, so that once the interest rates start going up, there's a nice pool of people overextended that can have their property stripped away from them. That's what that's about.
Okay, so this is the problem in UK, and I know what you will say, Mike. If we have a look at overseas, at what people are achieving in countries overseas, we've got something very different.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we've mentioned this. I've mentioned this before. This drive for war continuing from, really being pushed by the Western financial system, which is absolutely bankrupt. And I've particularly mentioned the long-term economic disaster that is the Condem conspiracy. I've been highlighting economic battle lines drawn over the BRICS versus the World Bank, IMF. But it's not just the BRICS that are focusing on infrastructure in Japan. Their Maglev project continues, with Tokai releasing their final plans for the Maglev line between Tokyo and Nagoya. They're basically expecting that to be finished by 2027. That train is going to pass through 7 sort of local counties, you might say, county equivalents. And it's going to take 40 minutes to get from Tokyo to Nagoya with this train, as opposed to 100 minutes at the moment with the bullet train. And they're also going to extend that then to Osaka following that, and that total trip from Tokyo to Osaka only taking 67 minutes. But it's not just in Japan, because even Iran is getting involved in infrastructure development, and they have been developing their own maglev train. They say they've designed and built a magnetic train with a speed of over 500 kilometers per hour with a single-sided linear engine. And so, what can we say here? Ordinary trains, they're saying ordinary trains can transport passengers at a speed of 150 to 200 kilometers per hour, while maglev trains have been built for speeds over 500 kilometers. So if Iran is doing this, Japan is doing this, the BRICS countries are doing this, why is Britain not getting involved in this type of sort of forward-looking positive development, which would give people an alternative to apprenticeships for coffee serving and shelf stacking, which is all that seem to be available in this country?
Well, my reply to that is consistent. I said at the outset, the country's being destroyed, so the LibLab Con are not here to help create a strong, healthy and wealthy nation. Their job is to destroy Britain as a nation state. Manufacturing gone, fishing gone, farming gone. You certainly don't want any innovative technology in the public sector. The job of Cameron's government, Blair and Nick Clegg, of course, very dangerous man in the background, is to absolutely destroy the nation state.
Very Agenda 21, though, isn't it? These high-speed rail links, everything.
Well, we could have
I think so.
No. We could have a debate on whether technology can actually assist us, and this is one of the things. We're so used to technology being used as a weapon to destroy things. We're not so used to technology being used for good purposes. So you'll have to debate this with Mike off air, actually, if I may say so. Well, we'll end on the news that Tory MP Douglas Carswell has defected to UKIP. Now, I've brought up this picture because I find it fascinating how the moment there is any reporting on UKIP, our national press, so this is an image from Sky News, but the image was appearing in the Mail, has to make a mockery of this MP. This is an MP who's expressed grave reservations with David Cameron's leadership and where he's taking the country, and of course our relationship with the European Union. What does the Daily Mail do? Well, immediately starts to demean this man by obviously picking a pretty unfortunate picture. But having said that, I've got some questions myself, because if this is accurate reporting, these were some of the comments that Mr. Carswell has made. He says in his criticisms of Cameron that it's been the failure to take a stand against the European Union has been at the heart of his decision. But he also says the Tories are not serious about real change. It's above all the failure to deliver on the promise of political reform that's driven me here today. Well, what reform is he talking about? Is he talking about we're not going fast enough to break Britain apart? Is he talking about the fact that we've got common law being wiped out? So there's some interesting words from Mr. Carswell, and I wonder what he actually means. And then he says Europe's the one continent on the globe that's not growing. Yet who in Westminster, who amongst our so-called leaders, is prepared to envisage real change? So what he seems to be indicating is that he wants Europe to be growing. Well, is he here for Britain or is he here for Europe? I don't know, but I'm now pretty puzzled as to what Mr. Carswell's agenda is. I'll leave people to come back and comment to us on that. Okay, well, we've had an extended news, effectively, due to the report from David Scott on Robert Greene. I can see the feedback on that's been particularly good, so we will invite Robert back with us.
David.
I beg your pardon. David back with us. I'd love to invite Robert, but of course he can't move out of his house. Freudian slip there, I think. What we will say is that surely from our news reports, particularly over the last couple of weeks, the state of the nation, the pitiful state of this country is becoming ever more clear. And certainly in South Wales, we are now watching what must be a full-blown attempt at the dictatorship through NATO.
Bumper stickers, T-shirts, all available from Carol, ukcolumn.org website, and email carol@ukcolumn.org. So please get involved so we can put an end to hopefully all these technical issues that we are having at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. We will be back same time tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.